Committee will come to order. Good afternoon and welcome to the second session of our public witness hearing specifically focused on American Indian and Alaska Native programs. I'd like to welcome all the distinguished tribal elders and leaders here today and thank our witnesses for appearing before the committee to share their perspectives on these important topics. In terms of logistics, I will call each panel of witnesses to the table, one panel at a time. Each witness will have 5 minutes to present testimony. Your full written testimony will be included in the record, so please don't feel pressured to cover everything in 5 minutes. But we will stick to the 5-minute rule because we do have like 80 tribes that we are trying to hear from this morning, this afternoon, tomorrow morning, and tomorrow afternoon. We will be using the timer to track the progress of each witness, and when the light turns orange, the witness will have 1 minute to remain to conclude his or her remarks. When the light turns red, I will ask the witnesses to stop so that we can remain on schedule. We'll hear from every witness on each panel before members will be provided an opportunity to ask questions. Because we have a full day ahead, I request that we try to keep things moving so we can stay on schedule and respect each other's time. And as I said, at about 1:30, we're going to have to leave for a few minutes for a vote anyway. If we have votes this afternoon, we will briefly recess to allow members to vote and then resume the panels when members return. I also want to note that committee rules prohibit the use of outside cameras, audio equipment during these hearings. The hearing can be viewed in its entirety on the committee's website, and an official hearing transcript will be available on gop.gov. I'd be happy to yield to my friend, Ranking Member Pingree. She has anything to say.
I can be very brief. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for bringing us together again. Thank you to all the witnesses that we'll hear from this afternoon. We really appreciate you taking your time to come and talk to us. It plays a huge role in informing what we do in the 2025 budget, so thank you very much in advance for what I know we're going to hear from you. So I'll yield that back.
Good afternoon. I am Jeffrey Gill, Herring Clan, and counselor from the Seneca Nation. The Seneca Nation is one of the largest of the 6 native nations from the historic Iroquois Confederacy, a democratic government that predates the formation of the United States. We are located in what is now called Western New York State, and we have over 8,500 enrolled members, most of whom reside on or within 50 miles of our multiple territories. I want to start by thanking the committee for providing advance appropriations for the Indian Health Service. Next, for fiscal year 2025, we asked the committee to provide targeted funding within the IHS budget to combat the opioid and fentanyl crisis, as everyone is fighting that today. Like other Native nations, the Seneca Nation experienced a surge in opioid abuse and fentanyl overdoses and deaths. Between 2015 and 2020, there were 110 documented overdoses on 2 of our territories. There have been so many funerals within the community over the past year that a group of Senecas formed a grassroots organization to help grieving families with our traditional ceremonies that are required when someone passes away. And lately it's been continuous. We see success when we can strengthen a person's cultural practices, offer them detoxification and treatment in a culturally relevant way. Our Seneca Strong program focuses on culturally focused drug, alcohol prevention, and recovery. Additionally, we are also hosting the World Indigenous Suicide Prevention Conference. The data available shows that opioid and fentanyl use is directly related to suicide in Indian country. We know how to address the mental behavioral health parts of this crisis. We just need some financial resources to assist. So we asked this committee to provide a separate pot of funding for the opioid fentanyl crisis in the IHS budget. We also asked for more funding for the EPA Section 106 program of the Clean Water Act. The Seneca Nation, like many other Native nations, relies on funding we receive from the Section 106 program. These funds help us develop, maintain, and expand our water quality programs. We use the funds to access and monitor the quality of the water within our territories and to control, prevent, and eliminate any pollution. At our headwaters of the Cattaraugus Creek lies the West Valley Nuclear Repository, and nuclear waste travels directly through our nation. Each Native Nation that applies for the Section 106 program will receive some funding. The problem is that more Native Nations are applying for the program, but the funding is not increasing to match the demand. This means that our base funding is decreasing each year. So we ask the committee to increase funding for the Section 106 Pollution Control Grant. I want to end today by reminding the committee that we are nations. I know you had mentioned tribes earlier, but the Seneca Nation is a nation-to-nation, government-to-government. We are not racial groups. The Seneca Nation has always defended our sovereign status. Our lands are not held in trust by the United States. We have original title to our lands, but our lands and people have been impacted by the United States. And that is why we seek responsible funding from you. Every U.S. President and Congress in recent decades acknowledges our government-to-government relationship. President Biden recently announced support for the Haudenosaunee to play lacrosse under our own indigenous flag when the sport returns to the Olympics in 2028. We memorialize the game and still utilize it as our healing medicine game to this day. So it makes sense to recognize our sovereignty to play it at the Olympics. In December, President Biden issued an executive order for Native Nations that says, now is the time to build upon this foundation by ushering in the next era of self-determination policies in our unique nation-to-nation relationships, during which we will better acknowledge and engage with tribal nations as respected and vital self-governing sovereigns. Again, that's from President Biden. We thank this committee for inviting us to share our views on the funding for the Interior, EPA, and IHS. In that spirit, during the break, I would like to present you items of interest from the Seneca Nation in honor of our government-to-government relationship. We need to bring those items to you so that you honor and understand where we are coming from. Yahweh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here to speak to you about the priorities of the Quapaw Nation, Hawaii. My name is Weena Supernaw, and I am the elected chairperson of the Quapaw Nation. I'm here today on behalf of 6,000 enrolled tribal members to ask that you help close a dark chapter in our history. Shortly after the establishment of our reservation in 1833, up through the 1960s, our trustee, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, allowed our natural resources to be plundered. The mining activities conducted on our lands produced more than 50% of the lead and zinc used to defend the United States during World War I, and from 1917 through 1947, over $20 billion of ore was extracted from our lands. They then allowed the plunderers to dump the waste on our land. BIA's actions not only destroyed our ability to use the reservation, they also poisoned it for generations. Our pleas for justice fell on deaf ears for more than 100 years. But finally, in 2012, a Congress member from the state of Oklahoma with a deep understanding for our history stepped in. And I'm incredibly grateful that this outstanding champion of Indian country, Congressman Tom Cole, now has the distinguished honor of chairing this very committee. Congressman Cole's legislation gave the Quapaw Nation and our co-claimants the ability to seek restitution from the United States in the U.S. Court of Federal Claims for the damages alleged in the case of Thomas Charles Bear et al. Versus the United States. With the support of our nation, our co-claimants, and the U.S. Department of Justice, on January the 9th, 2020, the court entered a historic settlement of the Bear case. The court recommended that the nation and our co-claimants received $137.5 million in compensation for the damages. This funding would help us address the generations of damage to our land and trauma to our people. Sadly, I'm here today because more than 4 years later, the Quapaw Nation and our co-claimants have not seen a dime. We have not seen a dime even though more than $20 billion in lead and zinc deposits were removed from our land. We haven't seen a dime even though portions of our reservation are so geologically unstable that garbage trucks cannot drive on certain roads out of fear they may collapse into ubiquitous mines authorized by the Bureau. We've not seen a dime, even though some of the piles of toxic mining waste that still sit on our reservation are more than 5 stories tall, taller than other man-made structures that exist for miles. We've not seen a dime, even though the Quapaw people have lived in and next to the Tar Creek Superfund site, one of the most toxic sites in the country. Congress, in fact, this very committee, can help us turn the page. I ask that you join the Quapaw Nation and our co-claimants in asking the U.S. to finally live up to its trust and treaty responsibilities. An appropriation to settle the Bear case will not undo all the damage, but it will help us move forward. Thank you, and I appreciate this opportunity to testify before you today. Gunagay.
Thank you. Carson?
Thank you, committee. I would just like to thank all of you on behalf of the Muskogee Creek Nation for allowing me the opportunity to provide testimony today. So just a little bit on the Muskogee Nation. We're the 4th largest federally recognized tribe in the United States with a reservation spanning nearly 5,000 square miles. And we represent the interests of over 100,000 enrolled citizens and thousands of other Native Americans and hundreds of thousands of non-natives who live within our reservation. One of the first kind of points I want to get into is public safety and justice. After the McGirt decision, the Muskogee Nation experienced unprecedented growth in both our criminal and civil jurisdiction, which has led to a rapid expansion of all court systems, law enforcement, and detention services. From this committee, we have received increases in funding to address these needs. However, the levels are inadequate to the amount of needs we're facing on the ground. I will just give you an example. Our Light Horse Police, which is our law enforcement, currently they receive about $4 million a year, and we ran the minimum amount they would need to be at capacity for both the size of the reservation, the mix of urban and rural, and for just the amount of criminal activity we're seeing. We're looking at $12 million, so we're receiving less than a third of that currently. And our detention services really need to be increased when we look at the associated costs with building and maintaining the infrastructure of detention centers. You're looking for an 80-bed facility. Operation costs yearly are going to be $1 to $2 million. So when we also don't know that the funding we receive for detention centers is not built into our compact yet, that is something we would really want to see, instead of this being an amount that is annually decided on, really looking at that being added to our compact. Outside of that, also education is something that we're really looking at within the Muskogee Nation. Specifically, we would like to implore Congress to increase the per student amount for the Johnson O'Malley. We realized that in 2018, the JOM Modernization Act set forward to increase the amount we would receive per student. However, they have still not increased that amount, and they don't plan to until the 2025 budget cycle. Even though this bill was passed and enacted in 2018, it was supposed to start in the 2019 fiscal year cycle. So looking at the amount of money we have not received for this in that amount of time, when we're receiving $60 per student and the state in Title VII rate is about $160, we would kind of implore the committee to look at ways to help kind of fund that gap where we weren't receiving funds, where we were entitled through our obligations. Another thing is the Indian Health Services, and we would strongly urge Congress and this committee to reclassify appropriations made to IHS as mandatory spending and establish a complementary mechanism to automatically kind of adjust the spending to keep up with pace in population growth, inflation, and healthcare costs, which have skyrocketed since the COVID-19 pandemic. Moving these funds to mandatory would ensure that appropriation Congress provides for Indian healthcare can be used efficiently and strategically by the Muskogee Nation to really best serve our community. At the Muskogee Nation, our Department of Health has a proven track record of utilizing IHS funds to operate community hospitals, long-term acute care facilities, physical rehabilitation centers, and we're one of the few tribes within the United States where we do offer service to tribal citizens and the general public. So we have seen the firsthand impact of our healthcare solutions being able to lift up rural and urban, native and non-native communities alike. And being able to make this mandatory and know these numbers and have them be distributed in timely segments would really allow our healthcare facilities to further develop and serve the communities in which they are located. The last thing I would like to bring up is the Environmental Protection Agency. As a place-based people, the Muskogee Nation has sacred histories and maintain cultural practices, and our tribe is tied to the land and our ancestral territories, and as a result, we are often disproportionately affected by a lot of environmental degradation that happens within our lands. And so we would really implore the community or the committee to look at creative ways to increase fiscal and infrastructural support for climate resiliency initiatives and clean energy expansion, not just for urban centers, but for rural areas as well. A lot of a lot of electrical initiatives, and the move away from gas is really difficult when you don't have the infrastructure pre-established in rural communities. And looking at ways in which we could increase appropriations to better establish this baseline infrastructure would be very beneficial. And we would also recommend an increase in appropriations to the EPA Tribal General Assistance Program, which has really been a pivotal program at the nation to deal with a lot of the onsets of climate change that we've seen. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Carson. Chief Hoskins.
Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and members of the Interior Subcommittee, I bring you greetings from the Cherokee Nation. I'm proud to represent more than 463,000 citizens living across our 7,000 square mile reservation in northeast Oklahoma and across the United States. In fact, we have citizens in all 435 congressional districts, and we are the largest tribe in the country. I wanted to share a few thoughts on this year's Interior bill. For fiscal 2025, we encourage the subcommittee to do four things. First, push the Indian Health Service to open a new round of applications for the joint venture program. As the committee knows, the joint venture construction program is the gold standard in an approach to innovative and cost-effective healthcare infrastructure development in Indian country. We at Cherokee Nation have successfully used this program 3 times. Twice we built clinics in rural and underserved areas of our reservation, and most recently we opened a 469,000 square foot outpatient center in our capital of Tahlequah. And we're prepared to use the joint venture program once again to increase access to quality health care in our region. And Congress can help by urging the Indian Health Service to take a new round of applications. Second, we want to see continued funding for tribes directly impacted by the McGirt decision. We want to thank the subcommittee for its continued attention to McGirt and public safety and issues related to McGirt over the past 3 appropriation cycles. We maintain one of the largest and I think one of the best justice systems in the country, but our needs and responsibilities continue to grow. So here's what we've done. We have increased our own public safety and justice spending by $35 million annually so that we can strengthen law enforcement capabilities. We have to meet a 380% increase in felony and misdemeanor filings in the wake of the McGirt case. The cost of sustaining that system are substantial, but we are grateful for the resources that this committee, this Congress, has provided in the wake of McGirt in recent years, and we would ask that the committee continue that support in fiscal year 25. Third, we ask the committee to closely scrutinize IHS spending requests and push back strongly against any IHS attempts to improperly use the, quote, new tribes funding to support tribes that are neither new nor restored. In FY25, IHS sent a justification to include $6 million in, quote, new tribes funding to, quote, support the delivery of healthcare services for the United Keetoowah Band of Cherokee Indians in Oklahoma. This funding is an improper use of federal dollars. It's unnecessary. It's redundant, and the subcommittee should frankly reject this request. This is at least the 3rd time that IHS has sought to use new tribes funding for the United Keetoowah Band. This is a tribe that was recognized more than 70 years ago. It was created by the Congress, but it was more than 70 years ago that the tribe was created. It is not a new tribe. 6 years ago, when the IHS sought to use this account for this sort of funding, IHS acknowledged that it's typically used, quote, when a new tribe is federally recognized or reinstated. The UKB is neither. And this is the most significant part, though, Mr. Chairman and members. It's completely duplicative. We already at Cherokee Nation provide health care services to all Native Americans living within our reservation. Congress should not let IHS waste the very limited amount of dollars, and that's what we're here to talk about collectively, that it commits to the Indian Health Service when we already provide the biggest and best health care in Indian country. Finally, Mr. Chairman, consider reclassifying tribal contract support costs. Right now, contract support costs are legally required and mandatory in nature, but they currently reside on the discretionary side of the ledger. This is taking up an increasingly larger share of IHS appropriation. It results actually in a net reduction in funding provided for actual programs. Given the potential budgetary impact of the case pending before the Supreme Court in Becerra versus San Carlos Apache, moving contract support costs to the mandatory spending side is simply good risk management on the part of the Congress. We appreciate your consideration of these issues. Happy to answer any questions when the time allows.
Thank you all for your testimony. What was the Burns case that you? Bear case. That you talked about 137.5
million.
137.5 million. That came out of a court case, right?
It did. It was actually a congressional reference in 2012 that sent it to the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. And then when the settlement was reached in January of 2020, it was basically referred back to Congress for purposes of appropriation.
I was just wondering why
I should say recommendation. I think that's the right
I was just wondering why it didn't come out of the Justice Fund, because most time when a court decision requires funding, it comes out of the Justice Department's Justice Fund. I see. Okay. Very interesting.
That's why we're here, for your help.
Yeah. We'll take a look at this and see what it's going to do. But I know that and the McGirt decision are going to cost some money. But I will tell you that we're very proud to have Mr. Cole as chairman of the Full Appropriations Committee, too. He's a friend to all of us on both sides of the aisle. And obviously, he's educated me to challenges and issues in Indian country for the years that I've known him. And he's one of my best friends in Congress, and he's going to do a great job as chairman. So, Ms. Pingree.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody for your testimony. I'm glad the chair is already looking into the Bear case, so I hope we can do something to make that right. That's really tragic how long you've had to go. And also just the idea that that much was taken from your land, which I know happened in many cases across the country, but I hope we can do something about that, and appreciate the Seneca Nation being here. Thank you. It was very interesting to hear about the lacrosse change in the Olympics. That'll be fascinating to watch. But also, I know you brought up a lot of really critically important things we've been talking about today, about the opioid crisis and many of the other things that are challenges. So I hope we can address some of those in this year's budget.
Thank you for the comments.
Absolutely. And to the Oklahoma tribes, thank you. I had a chance to visit that fantastically beautiful, just breathtaking, honestly, the clinic that you built and the medical school. I mean, really such an amazing example of what can be done when the resources are there. And I know it's so different for every tribe, but really, really impressive, the things that have been done with the resources. And I look forward to getting back to Oklahoma again to just see more of the tribes and the communities. But certainly, I think we're all counting on having Chairman Cole weigh in this year. I hope you all weigh in with him about our allocation in this committee, because that is really where this all starts. I mean, I think we have to step back and deal with some bigger funding crises that we have in meeting our treaty and tribal obligations. But for this committee in particular, we're often struggling with funding the EPA and the BIA and BIE and the arts agencies. And if we start with a very small allocation, then everybody gets these cuts that are completely unconscionable, honestly, to make. So when it comes to things like McGirt, which really deserves significant funding, and the contract support costs, absolutely big big critical items to fund. I hope we can work with the chair of the full committee, and I think we're all fortunate to have him in this position this year. So thank you all so much, really, for, I can't talk about every single thing you brought up, but really, really impressive testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to express my appreciation to all of our guests. I know it's quite a commitment to come all the way to Washington, D.C. to speak for just a few minutes on the things that are important to you back at home. I've found this very useful, and I want you to know I appreciate you being here. Thanks.
Well, I would just like to agree with everything that's been said, including thank you so much for your time for coming. But if I could follow up with you, Mr. Ball, on the third-party payment. So you said you're taking third-party payments. Tell me, is it insurance? Is it Medicaid, Medicare? Is it VA? What third-party payments are you taking?
From my understanding, it is. From my understanding, it's insurance, Medicare, Medicaid.
It's everything.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
'Cause I know some when we started doing the VA for third-party payment, it wasn't a smooth start. So I'd be interested in knowing how it's going. If you would maybe follow back with your business office and share with the chair, how the third-party payments are going, who's involved, what's working, what's not working. Maybe it's working great with private insurance, but it's not working great with the third party, with the federal government or the state for Medicaid, Medicare. Let us know.
Yeah, that would be great. We have a commission set aside for that, and I'd love to connect you
Yeah,
and anyone else on the
because
committee with them.
A lot of tribes are in the position where they can sometimes serve other areas, and it's a win-win for everyone. And where we can figure out how that works, where that sweet spot is, we'd like to do it, especially when it comes to dialysis in very rural areas. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Nothing much to add. Thank you all so much for your time and your testimony and the hard work you do every day, and we'll do our best to support you. Thank you.
Let me ask my Oklahoma tribes. Tom took me to Oklahoma in August. It's hot in Oklahoma in August. But we visited a lot of tribes. But really, the question I'd like to ask you is, how's the tornadoes been on your tribal members and stuff?
We actually fared okay, at least last night.
Did you?
Let's just keep our fingers crossed and keep our prayers to the Creator that kind of continues to bypass us. Not all of our neighbors fared so well last night.
Mr. Chairman, we're assessing the damage now, but in Barnsdall in the Osage Nation, there was a fatality. But we're
saw
just
that.
learning about it.
Pretty dramatic effects. I told Tom the other day, don't you know they call that Tornado Alley? You're not supposed to live there. But it is, it's beautiful country, and our prayers and thoughts go out to all your members, and hope that they're safe in this environment that seems to happen all the time, Appreciate it. Thank you all for being here today, and we look forward to working with you as we take into consideration your sentiments and views of what we should be doing in this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Okay. Then we're going to call up panel number 9. John Pettigrew, Julius Murray, Dustin. Clatush. Okay. I was close. You knew what I was talking about. Well, yeah. And Cindy Marchand. Clatush. It's just kind of like the way it's spelled. of you to testify before we go to votes, then we'll have to run over and vote, and then we'll be right back. First, John. We've talked before. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm John Pettigrew. I'm the acting chief of police for the Oglala Sioux Tribe Department of Public Safety. I got about 20 years of law enforcement experience with the Oglala Sioux Tribe Department of Public Safety. Excuse me. The Pioneer Reservation is the third largest reservation in the United States. It's just under the size of Connecticut, the state of Connecticut, with an enrolled membership of around 151,000. Last year, Elgin Young, the former chief of police, testified about our extreme officer shortage and an increase in violent crime. In 2022, we had 138,000 calls for service with 33 officers. In 2023, we've seen a jump from around 30,000 to around 165,000 calls for service with less officers. We only had 30. That's 4 to 6 officers per shift. Add to that the medical clearances and that are required for many of the people that we arrest. These clearances take up to anywhere from 3 to 6 hours. And just like that, the 4 to 5 officers covering 9 districts is down to 3 to 5, 2 to 4, depending on how busy it is. And because of this, our response time for non-emergent calls is running 30 minutes to an hour. Even emergent calls, depending on the officer covering the area, if he's busy with medical clearances, prisoner transport, or more often than not, is covering multiple districts and has to respond from a large distance away. Officer safety is a huge concern for me. As with response time, backup is over a half hour if backup is available at all. This leaves my officers in a very dangerous position. 5 minutes is a lifetime when you're fighting for your life, let alone 30 minutes. My federal partners, the FBI and BIA drug agents, are based in Rapid City, an hour and a half away. But it takes 2 to 4 hours for any call-ups for them to respond. My investigators and officers are first at these incidences and complete most of the work before they arrive. I do appreciate the help and the work they do, and we do work very closely with them. But when my officers do most of the work but get little no credit, it's a little upsetting. The picture I'm showing you, I believe she handed out, is of a 13-year-old student carrying a handgun. It was just an isolated incident, but it's not. We have over 100 weapons in our evidence that were taken on school grounds. That's just on the school grounds, the parking lots, classrooms, those kind of things. Knives, handguns, machetes, those types of things. Many state schools refuse to come to a reservation because they consider it too dangerous to send their people, their kids. I have a recording. I'm not sure if I give it to you guys here or not. It's a 911 recording, but I must warn you, it's graphic. On this recording, you will hear what my 911 dispatchers hear. A young woman beaten by multiple men for over an hour. She suffered fractures to her arm, skull, ribs, and legs. Because of the lack of officers and the obstacles I have mentioned before, it took 1.5 hours to respond. As many of you may know, what it feels like to feel helpless, knowing someone is in danger and you are powerless to help. My officers know this feeling very well. My officers are overworked, underpaid, and on the verge of burnout. My officers receive the same training to do the same job as BIA and state officers, our state counterparts, but do it for far less pay, no real benefits, and far less resources. The BIA funds my department based at 15% of need. 15%. In what world is that acceptable? But what we are asking for is a budget correction to bring us up to par with our federal and state counterparts. But to be real, I know this will never happen. but something needs to. Because 15% is a crazy number. We are not asking for more than we need, just a fair share, because 15% is a joke. I thank you for your time. Allow me to be here.
Thank you. We got time for one more. To this, let's have you testify, and then we're gonna run over and vote real quick, then we'll be back.
Okay, I'll read fast then. Chair Simpson, sorry.
Could you hand me that?
Chair Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and honorable members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Julius T. Murray III, and I serve as the chairman of the Ute Tribal Business Committee. Our reservation is in northeastern Utah and is the second largest in the United States, covering roughly 4.5 million acres. We have about 2,700 members, and over half of our members live on the reservation. Investment in Indian energy is needed. Continued neglect and misguided criticism of oil and gas and development in the Uinta Basin presents a threat to the nationwide energy economy that supports countless jobs for the American families. More than 91% of our tribal government revenues come from energy development. These revenues fund our government and provide essential services to our members. Energy development on our land supports thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars in economic development. The tribe cannot tap into the full potential of its mineral estate due to limited access to refineries capable of processing black wax and yellow wax crude. The remoteness of our reservation and limited means of transportation have forced the tribe to rely on refineries in Salt Lake City with limited capacity to process crude oil. In 2013, the final report for the Uinta Basin Energy and Transportation Study forecasted up to $29 billion in lost production revenue over the course of 30 years due to transportation constraints in the Uinta Basin. This report was published over a decade ago, and yet no meaningful transportation improvements have been implemented. The proposed Uinta Basin Railway project would have expanded access to proven refineries in the Gulf Coast by connecting the Uinta Basin to the national rail network. Rail access would decrease trucks on the nation's highways and grow the nationwide market for waxy crude, low sulfur, solid substance that presents for fewer environmental hazards than other more common forms of crude oil. Energy development in Indian Country also continues to be slowed down by staffing shortages at the Bureau of Indian Affairs. A year ago, the BIA Division of Energy and Mineral Development had 46 contract employees. Now there are just over 20 contract employees. Many of these layoffs occurred on the same day, further demonstrating that this administration's effort to target the energy sector funding for qualified staff decreased from $26 million to about $5 million. The subcommittee should invest more funding to support Indian energy development and provide enough BIA staffing. Funding for BIA law enforcement and detention staff is needed as well. The subcommittee should also provide increase for BIA law enforcement and detention staff funding. BIA and its Office of Justice Services lack the funding to fulfill the United States Treaty and Trust responsibility to maintain safety in our tribal communities. Due to the lack of funding, the tribe is required to fund half of BIA law enforcement officers and provide over 50% of on-reservation law enforcement services, including radios, patrol vehicles, and other necessary equipment. Funding for detention services also needs to be increased. Congress stopped the funding for law enforcement detentions and tribal court construction when the tribe was near the top of the construction priority list. The tribe was forced to use $36 million of its own tribal funds to build a new tribal justice center. The tribe contributed another $1 million to cover stored-up costs, including necessary equipment and supplies. The Tribal Justice Center was completed in 2016 using BIA-approved plans which have complied with the applicable federal size and use specifications. The tribe entered into a memorandum of agreement, MOA, with BIA to authorize federal occupancy of the building and detention areas in exchange for a federal contribution to the operation and maintenance of these spaces. However, the Tribal Justice Center remains mostly empty due to lack of funds to provide enough staffing. The BIA has been granted oversight through the MOA and implemented 4 phases with the goal of ultimately reaching full capacity. The facility remains at the first phase of implementation and requires a staff of 13 correction officers. However, BIA is unable to employ 4. Is only able to employ 4. Tribal members are sent away from reservation to county jails, and BIA pays county detention facilities every 2 weeks, diverting funding to off-reservation facilities. Additionally, prisoners are often released from jail or not picked up on warrants due to the lack of space and additional cost of housing them off our reservation. This creates a public safety issue for our tribe. Base funding for law enforcement must be increased by 3 to 5 times the current levels to meet the tribe's needs. Infrastructure to UN, the Indian Irrigation Project requires critical federal funding for repair and rehabilitation due to decades of deferred maintenance, disrepair, and deterioration. Recently, the D.C. Circuit Court has confirmed that the United States has a trust obligations to the tribe in the management and administration of the UIIP. It is of paramount importance that Congress allocates the necessary federal funding to ensure that its solemn trust obligation to the tribe is met. Conclusion, Congress must uphold its trust and treaty responsibility to the Union tribe and the other tribes. Chronic underfunding of programs supporting Indian tribes continue to plague our ability to develop our resources, promote our economics, and provide safe communities. Thank you.
Thank you. I apologize for this, but we're going to have to go to vote, and we'll be back in hopefully within 15, 20 minutes. Get over there. The next vote doesn't take that long, so we'll be back as soon as we can, but I'd like to talk to you about police protection and what needs to be done. So, committee stands in recess for approximately 15, 20, 25 minutes. Thank you. Start with- Committee will be back in order. Thank you for your patience. It took a little longer than we thought, but Cindy, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Cindy Marchand, and I serve as the Secretary of the Colville Business Council, which is the governing body of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation. I thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony today on the subcommittee's fiscal year 2025 spending bill. By way of background, although now considered a single Indian tribe, the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation is a confederation of 12 Aboriginal tribes and bands from across eastern Washington state, northeastern Oregon, Idaho, and British Columbia. The present-day Colville Reservation is in north-central Washington state and was established by Executive Order 1872. The Colville Reservation covers more than 1.4 million acres and geographically is larger than the state of Delaware, and it's the largest Indian reservation in the Pacific Northwest. The first issue I would like to discuss is the Indian Health Service. The Colville Tribes has endured many problems with IHS mismanagement of the PRC program. Last week, the tribe testified at a legislative hearing before the Subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs on a bill that we developed that addresses the problem of tribal members being sent to collection agencies when IHS fails to pay health providers under the PRC care program. The Colville Tribes would like the subcommittee to include report language that directs Government Accountability Office to investigate and report on IHS's management of the purchased referred care program at IHS managed facilities. Specifically, we would like GAO to address why IHS has allowed such a large amount of carryover PRC funds to accumulate in most IHS area offices. We estimate that of the $34 million in PRC carryover funds in the IHS Portland area, as much as $24 million of those dollars is attributable to unreconciled PRC purchase orders from the Colville Service Unit from the PRC program. There are many problems with IHS's administration of the PRC program, and we request that the committee direct GAO to investigate the carryover issue in report language. I would also like to discuss public safety. There is constant need for additional funding from tribal law enforcement and detention operations. Large land-based tribes almost always have too many officers, and this results in long response times to calls. There are occasions when the Colville Tribes has only one single officer on duty for the entire 1.4 million acre reservation. Collectively, the police department has a 30% vacancy rate for both commissioned and non-commissioned officer positions. Nationwide, BIA law enforcement is funded at only a fraction of the actual need. Recruitment and retention remain acute issues even with the Colville Tribes supplementing the BIA funding allocation by more than 200% annually. The Colville Tribes requests that the committee provide a $100 million increase for the criminal investigations and police services account to enable tribes in all BIA regions to hire more police officers and retain their existing police officers. The last issue I would like to discuss is wildland fire funding. Since 2015, more than half of the 1.4 million acre Colville Reservation was burned due to wildfire events. Yet my tribe and other tribes must compete for resources within DOI for funding from other DOI land management agencies. On a per-acre basis, Indian tribes receive a fraction of what is spent on U.S. Forest Service and other federal lands for forest management and wildfire preparedness, yet make those dollars go farther than federal agencies ever could. Funding for wildfire preparedness is particularly important as the treatments funded by this program helps keep small and moderate fires from becoming mega fires. Because of our history having to deal with major fires, we have been at the forefront of recommending policy changes to enable the Colville Tribes and similarly situated tribes to protect their on-reservation forests. The Colville Tribes ask that the subcommittee include report language that directs the Secretary of Interior to prioritize tribal requests for preparedness funding from the Wildland Fire Management account. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. This concludes my testimony, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Dustin?
That's all I get right there, right? Thank you, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and members of the subcommittee for having me here today to provide testimony. My name is Dustin Clatouche. I'm the chairman of the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation. The Chehalis Reservation was established by executive order in 1864 and is located between the confluence of the Chehalis River and the Black River. Geographically, the tribe is located approximately halfway between Seattle and Portland, just off Interstate 5. The tribe's 5,500-acre reservation is largely checkerboarded and spans 3 different counties in southwest Washington state. The tribe has approximately 996 tribal members, with 40% of them being under the age of 18. I would like to highlight 3 different issues today. The first is law enforcement. The Chehalis Tribal Police Department carries out law enforcement and detention services under contract with the BIA under the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act of 1975. The tribe's police department has 13 commissioned officers who are certified under the state law to enforce state and local criminal laws, in addition to Chehalis tribal criminal laws. Like most tribes, the BIA's portion of the tribe's law enforcement budget represents a fraction of the actual need. The Chehalis tribe needs additional resources to assist with recruitment and retention of experienced law enforcement officers. We have lost experienced law enforcement officers to neighboring jurisdictions, offering more competitive pay and benefits. The tribe currently offers a competitive salary only because it supplements the funding it receives from the BIA with significant tribal funds. More BIA law enforcement funding is needed to allow tribes to be more competitive with neighboring jurisdictions. In fiscal year 2024, most BIA law enforcement programs receive level funding compared to the fiscal year 2023 ENACT levels. The fiscal year 2025 President budget requested seeks $45.5 million increase in criminal investigation and police services, with $33.5 million specifically allocated to increase the number of officers and investigators in Indian country. The tribe is requesting that the subcommittee fund the criminal investigation and police services account with at least the fiscal year 2025 requested levels. The second issue I'd like to discuss is housing. 40% of the Chehalis tribal members are under the age of 18, demonstrating a need for new housing for tribal members that will only become more acute over time. Our Tribal Housing Authority receives formula funds from HUD under the Indian Housing Block Grant, but these funds do not cover all housing-related needs. The BIA's Housing Improvement Program provides funds to tribal members with substandard or no housing and no immediate housing assistance. HIP funds can be used for home repair, renovation, replacement, and new housing. Like most tribes, the unmet housing needs the Chehalis tribe needs more resources from the HIP program to improve and extend the life of its existing housing stock. The President's fiscal year 2025 budget request seeks $18 million for fiscal year 2025. The tribe requests that the committee fund the HIP program at the request levels or higher levels. Finally, I want to highlight a report language request in my written statement. In the BIA's Northwest Regional Office, there's an acute shortage of contracting officers to process various types of transactions, including process payments for contract support costs. The tribe is awaiting payment for its CSCs for fiscal years 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024, which collectively amount nearly $4 million. Timely payments of CSCs assist in keeping our contracted programs such as law enforcement, housing, and other programs and services operating smoothly. Based on discussions with BIA, the reason for the delay is shortage of contracting officers in the BIA. We understand that this problem is not limited to the Northwest region, but is nationwide. Given the backlog in payments that the Chehalis tribe and other tribes are experiencing, the department should deploy contracting officers from other agencies within the department to assist the BIA in clearing the backlog of the CSCs and other payments that tribes are waiting for. My written statement provides language from the subcommittee to consider that would give the department this direction. I want to thank the subcommittee for allowing me to provide testimony, and look forward to answering any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank all of you for your patience and stuff. But we've talked a lot about tribal law enforcement, and I don't want to. This is an excuse, not a good one. But the reality is we're going to get an allocation here, and we're going to have some things we're going to have to fund. We've concentrated over the last several years on trying to increase Indian health services, figuring that was the highest priority. Many of us, I think everybody on this committee, have wanted to increase Indian education accounts and Indian law enforcement accounts. I think when you look at the number of murdered and missing Indigenous people in this country, it's due to the lack of law enforcement funding and stuff, and the fact that you have so few officers per huge acres and stuff like that. Somehow, and I don't know what the answer is yet, we've got to get an allocation where we can both take care of Indian health services and we can do those other things that are necessary, because for too long we've said, well, we got to do Indian health services. Health is the number one issue. We got to do that, you know. And the others we tried to increase a little bit, but frankly we've got to do more. And I wish I had the answer to address it, but it is a travesty what's happening with law enforcement and the need out on the reservations and stuff. I was just talking to one of my chairmen of the show bands today, and in Fort Hall there, it's 12 miles to Pocatello, it's 12 miles to Blackfoot, and as soon as they train up an officer and he gets good, guess where he goes? Where they can offer more money. So they are the training center for firemen and for police officers, and that's a huge problem. And somehow we've got to address that, and the only way to address it is by paying them the wages to keep them actually where they are. So anyway, I appreciate your testimony, and I told a panel earlier that I'm rereading a book that I read when I was first chairman of this committee on Indian rights and Indians and tribes' rights and stuff. And I just finished last week the one chapter on law enforcement. I don't know how you guys do anything, because you wonder whose law do you fall under. You know, if you're an Indian and you commit a crime on trust land and an Indian law enforcement officer picks you up, it's different if you're a non-Indian or if you're on the reservation and it's non-trust land. It is a jumble. I don't know how officers get trained enough to know whether they have jurisdiction or whether it's the state or federal government that has jurisdiction. Somehow we need to make this simpler. So anyway, thank you. Shelley?
Thank you. I'll just reinforce that again, and we've talked about it, pretty much every panel, but when you talk about a reservation as big as the one that you're dealing with, you really are reminded these numbers just don't work. It's something like 15% of the actual funding that we get, and even if we can meet the requested budget this year, it'll be $651 million, and we've been told it's about $3 billion in need. So we just have to do something about it. And you're right, we try to focus on Indian health, so we'll do, but we're just so far behind. I just admire the people who are willing to be in law enforcement. As you have all mentioned, people are drastically underpaid, but just the danger that every law enforcement officer is in when they're so understaffed and trying to meet the needs that you've all talked about. So I hope we can do something about that. Certainly on the forest fire issues, through the Forest Service, we're trying to put more money towards dealing with the problems there, but if not enough is reaching Indian country, we have to figure out what to do about that. And those backlogs on the contract support numbers are, I don't know how you run your budget every year being that far behind. So we'll keep working on it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Collins.
Chair, I'd like to find out, Kladish, is it? Klatouche, excuse me. Is thinking that everybody else is in the same boat, But I'll say from the VA, when it came to backlogs and that in the VA, we found that some visions were doing great and others were not doing great. And part of it was management, part of it was turnover, other things like that. I'd be interested to know how the other contractors' offices are doing. We need to do something, but I think we need to find out if there's one that knows how to do it right with whoever that they have, or maybe there's just so much turnover. And then we also have to get our bills done on time, because that also delays everything. But I just, while we're on the law enforcement, sir, when you were giving your testimony, you can see the concern for your officers on your face, the gravity in which you take the situation. And the concern I have is for your officers, not only for their personal safety when they're out on patrol, but for when they come home from patrol. So we have tried to boost things up in healthcare. What's out there for mental health, either Zoom conversations or whatever, or are your officers so overworked with time spent on the job that they don't have time to take care of themselves and do the obligation that they feel for their family? How's their mental health?
Well, the fact is that most times those officers don't have time for themselves. With that few officers, they run a 12-hour shift, they're working all night. Most times that 12-hour shifts, in all reality, is an 18-hour shift. They go home, go to bed, and come back to work the next day.
Is there programming available for them if they had the time to take it? Because it might be, if we don't have the programming available, that's an issue we need to address, along with pay, number of officers, and that too.
There is a program through IHS, the mental health and whatnot, and the employee assistance program that's available to them, but most officers do not take advantage of those things.
Thanks, Chairman. And thanks to my friends from Washington State for being here. Chairman, the issue you raised with regard to contract support costs, one, I don't think we cover enough terrain with regard to the contract support costs that are provided, and two, the fact that you're seeing these delays is really unacceptable. Can you just say a few words about what it means? I think intuitively we have a sense of what that means in terms of budgeting, but what has it meant in terms of the provision of services, your capacity to budget for your tribe?
Pretty much it's just moving money around to take care of these, the housing stuff like that, housing and all the other things that the contract should be supporting, Yeah. So it's just taking money away from different departments that shouldn't be going anywhere.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you for being here. Thanks for sharing. Thanks, Chairman.
And thank you all. Thank you all for putting up with our delay there for a little bit, and look forward to working with you as we try to put this bill together and to try to address the multiple issues that you bring up. Thank you. Panel number 10.
They might not be here, so TBD on that one.
Okay. Mullen Bryant. Daryl Maria Thora Padilla. Padilla. I have to put on my glasses to be able to see that. Ah, yeah. I got Ms. Bryant, you're first.
On? Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Mullian Bryant, Penobscot Nation Tribal Ambassador. Thank you, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, my fellow Mainer, and members of the subcommittee for allowing me to testify today. I'm going to focus on funding for tribal courts and law enforcement, including game wardens, within the Interior budget, and on funding for programs within the EPA. The Penobscot Nation's lands historically covered much of what is now the state of Maine. Our land holdings became scattered after the enactment of a land claim settlement between us, Maine, and the federal government in 1980. Today, we rely on the federal government to meet its trust responsibility by providing us with funds for certain programs that we then use to leverage for additional competitive grant funding. We understand that this bill has one of the smaller allocations each year, but this bill is the fundamental bill that fulfills the bulk of the federal government's trust responsibility to tribal nations. It funds direct services to Native people and protects our food and water sources. The 1980 Settlement Act I previously referenced requires the Interior to provide us with funds through the use of a self-governance compact, so our participation in self-governance is mandated by Congress. We cannot retrocede our programs back to the Interior Department if we feel that the shortfall in funding makes us incapable of properly operating a program. So this is different from other tribes in the country. There are three components to our tribal justice system. We have our police department, our game wardens, who are located in our natural resources department, and lastly, our tribal court. They are all severely underfunded. This well-known shortfall in funding creates an incentive for criminals to commit crimes. It is also demoralizing for our employees and citizens. The biggest obstacle in our police department right now is our inability to compete with state and local police departments to recruit, hire, and retain officers. When we finally get qualified applicants and train them, they don't stay long often because they are quickly recruited to a better paying job with lower hours and retirement benefits. These vacancies result in our existing officers having to work over 40 hours a week with no vacation time, which affects the wellness of our officers. The same is true of our game wardens, where we consistently have 1/3 of our positions vacant because we cannot recruit and retain qualified personnel. We are growing more concerned about these shortages given the increased activities of Chinese drug cartels developing a sprawling network of illicit cannabis growing operations in rural Maine. The chronic shortage in funding for law enforcement also impacts our tribal court system. Of the more than 100 cases our tribal court handles each year, the vast majority of them involve some kind of substance abuse issue. Almost 80% of our child welfare cases involve parental opioid abuse. We ask the committee increase funding for the tribal priority allocations to specifically address funding for tribal courts and tribal law enforcement compensation. We also ask that the committee increase funding for the Tawahi program and direct BIA to expand the number of tribal nations who can participate because we have been waiting to participate for numerous years. Lastly, we ask that the committee increase funding for the Conservation Law Enforcement Officer Program, Wildlife Management and Natural Resources Law Enforcement Programs to help fund additional game wardens. We are a sustenance tribe, which means that our people continue to rely on hunting and fishing, and having access to these traditional foods cuts down on the cost of commercial groceries and also reduces our health disparities. Given the importance of our land, wildlife, forestry, and water to our daily living, our Department of Natural Resources runs several programs focused on management and protection of these resources. We ask the committee to direct EPA to identify and create tribal set-asides in all state and tribal assistance grants programs, including programs funded by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Within the state and tribal assistance grants portion of the EPA funding bill, the Penobscot Nation relies on Section 319, non-point source, and Section 106, pollution control. We also rely on funding from the Indian Environmental General Assistance Program, and we would ask that the committee increase funding for all three programs. We use EPA funds to protect our waters and lands. We conduct multiple water quality monitoring and assessments across our lands, and this helps us to report back to Congress with our data and update state water quality standards, as well as helping us study contaminants in wild foods used by our people and allows us to develop health consumption advisories. That concludes my remarks. I would love for you to read our full written remarks, which flesh out a lot of these acts, and it's great to be back here with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thora.
All right, we're good. My name is Thora Padilla, and I'm honored to serve as president of the Mescalero Apache Tribe thank you for this opportunity to testify about urgent funding needs to combat violence in Indian country and bring parity to tribal forestry funding. For the Mescalero people, forestry is our way of life. Our forest is part of our traditions and provides food, shelter, and employment and protects our vital watershed. For more than a century, we worked with the BIA to make our forestry program one of the best in the Southwest. In 2022, the tribe contracted BIA forestry activities so that we could set the priorities for our forest. Since the 1990s, the tribe has conducted essential hazardous field reduction projects, developed strategic ridgetop field breaks, and implemented wildland-urban interface treatments across the reservation. The tribe has treated more than 60,000 acres. These projects were coordinated with commercial harvest operations, recognizing that understory thinning alone won't reduce destructive crown fires. Our work has proven effective to protecting lives and property throughout Indian country while maintaining the healthiest forests in the nation. Despite the importance of this mission, budget cuts slashed our forestry staffing levels by 43% since 2016 and limited treatments in our forest. The current funding system is now at a breaking point. My first request is that you bring tribal forest funding into parity with Forest Service funding. I urge you to follow the IFMAT 4 recommendations to increase tribal forestry funding by $96 million and increase wildland fire funding by $42 million. While our forest management practices attempt to armor our reservation, fire knows no boundaries. The Mescalero Reservation is sandwiched between the northern and southern sections of the Lincoln National Forest. The 2012 Little Bear Fire that started on the Lincoln showed the impact of unhealthy federal forests. Due to a slow response and poor management, the fire caused millions in damage to the tribe's ski area. As a result, my second request is for report language to extend Tribal Forest Protection Act authority throughout Forest Service lands where tribes have proven connections. Tribes must be empowered to do more complementary work throughout federal lands to better protect our homelands. The federal agencies have refused to conduct real wildland-urban interface work, and as a result, our nation will never address the wildfire crisis. Too often, the agencies shy away from treating these areas because of the environmental complexities. We've seen this over and over with the Lincoln. I now want to turn to the critical public safety needs facing Indian country. Mescalero views the federal government's treaty obligation to provide for public safety as non-negotiable. For that reason, our community relies on the BIA's Mescalero agency to provide direct law enforcement services. I regret to report that the agency is failing our people. Violence is escalating and many are losing faith in the justice system. While I have a long list of failures at the Mescalero agency, we acknowledge that many of our concerns stem from a lack of funding. This outdated system is broken and lacks any measures to hold federal officials accountable. We urge Congress to take action to fix this system and, more importantly, to fund it. For years, you've heard about the staggering rates of domestic and sexual violence, the crisis of missing and murdered, and so much more. These horrific statistics are the result of the broken justice system and a lack of funding. The BIA's most recent report to Congress confirms the funding disparity. Current funding meets only 13% of need. It would take an additional 11,500 police officers to adequately serve Indian country. To address these shortfalls, we urge you to support the TIBC request to increase BIA public safety and justice funding to $2.9 billion. To improve accountability to direct service tribes, we urge you to include report language to require the BIA to share crime data and staffing information with the tribe that agency serves. We shouldn't have to FOIA vital information about our community. Finally, we urge you to coordinate with the CJS Subcommittee to address these shortfalls. DOJ has an equal obligation to protect Indian country. CJS should establish a 10% set-aside for DOJ programs and increase agents serving on the FBI's Indian Country Crime Unit. Thank you for this opportunity to come before you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Darnell Maria, and I have with me my detention administrator, Magnolia Uslo. Thank you for providing this opportunity, Chairman, and also the committee here. I'm an alumni of NSU, just to let you know. I have 4 priority issues with Rayma Navajo. Rayma Navajo is a sub-political unit of the Navajo Nation. There are 110 chapters within the nation. However, Rayma Navajo is under the southwest region out of Albuquerque. We're geographically isolated and semi-autonomous from the Navajo Nation. We do have 4 priorities that we have. The number 1 is the inadequate funding of tribes of 638 programs as compared to BIA programs. Many of the federal programs, as we all know, have been contracted by the tribes, the BIA and Indian Health Services. Federal law requires that the programs be funded at the same level if the Secretary had operated these programs directly. And the funding is for facilities operation and maintenance, replacement of buildings, equipment, and vehicles. However, we continue to be woefully underfunded, and we need to have additional funding. For many years since 2018, the chapter continued to receive program funds at the same level with only minor increases and even some decreases. When increases are funded by Congress, the tribes often do not receive these increases in the years the funds are proportionate to BIA. Perhaps forward funding would be ideal for all tribes. So that's what I have there. And then we request the Chapter 638 programs be increased by 30% across the board. This increase is necessary even to begin to provide services within our contracts that we have. Number 2 is lack of funding and basic police operations and fair value officer salary, as we've heard throughout this afternoon. According to the CFR 12.34, police officers operating under the 638 contract should be paid the same wages as the BIA Office of Justice Services. However, BIA does not fund this mandate, even though the BIA has received $23 million in annual funding since 2009. Despite an additional $22 million in FY 2019 alone, very little of the almost $50 million in increases BIA has received since 2019 has come to Rayma Navajo, except for congressional inflation adjustments. We receive funds at less than 40% of the overall annual operation budget. There is clearly a disparity, as the chart will show, in terms of how much Rayma Navajo receives compared to the districts in the southwest region. We have a Pueblo of Zuni, which neighbors our Rayma Navajo community there, and it has the similar population, the similar land base and all of that, and yet Rayma Navajo doesn't receive as much funding as they do. We are requesting for an additional $400,000 per year of recurring annual funding for our tribal law enforcement. I think the thing that we need to do is to have the funding go directly to tribally operated program law enforcement, because when funding is allocated, central office takes a chunk of it, and then the 12 regions take an additional, and then the tribe is left with what is available. So I would like to take that for you to take that into consideration. The new public safety facility, Rayma Navajo, has been severely impacted socially and economically, resulting in lack of infrastructure. We have a 47-year-old facility that has been determined deficient and requires replacement. The Rayma Navajo chapter has been planning a new public safety building for 30 years. The chapter has taken the initiative in 2010 to complete the land withdrawal of 15 acres, the roadway and utility easement survey, the boundary survey, the archaeological survey, the biological survey, environmental assessment, you name it, that's been all completed. We just need funding to plan and design of the new public safety, and it's basically shovel-ready. So we're requesting an amount of $500,000 for the architectural and engineering design for the police department. Unmet needs for road maintenance. The road maintenance program operates a road maintenance under the 638 contract. Our annual funding recurring budget is for staff, material, food, fuel, and maintenance. In 2023, we received $323,891. However, we have received no funding for 2024. Our road maintenance, general road maintenance functions required to maintain a safe and sustainable roadway without a capacity to increase. We barely have 6 staff members, and there is a need for additional staff. And one of the important matters regarding this is that our current inventory of equipment needs show that they are in constant repairs, are dilapidated and beyond its useful life. We are requesting an increase of $700,000 to meet these identified needs. Then all the rest of it also entails information on tribal transportation program and how we have to utilize those funds to cover the road maintenance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everybody, for your testimony, and in particular, thank you, Ambassador Bryant, for being with us today. We're so happy to have 2 people from Maine with us today, and so much of what you brought up was things that we've been hearing about today, but the Maine tribes have particular challenges because of the land claim settlement, so it makes it even more important that we have the funding there. I was glad you brought up the hunting and fishing, the game wardens part. I mean, hunting and fishing is a huge part of the tradition in Maine, and critically important that you're able to have the personnel that you need. And I was glad you brought up the fact that it's not only important to what people eat and the cost of food, but also to just overall health and well-being. And so we want to do everything we can to support that. And also on the law enforcement and courts side that we've heard so much about today, it is, Mr. Chair, a bizarre challenge that we have in Maine right now is these weird Chinese drug cartels who have been buying up small rural homes in communities all over, rural Maine, and doing big marijuana growing operations. It's attracted the FBI's attention and has become a big law enforcement issue, and it's like sort of like little mushrooms springing up everywhere. So they have a unique crime problem going on that you wouldn't have sort of pictured in the outreach of northern Maine. And thank you as well. Certainly the forest issues you brought up are important. We've heard a little bit about that today, making sure that the tribes are funded on parity with the Forest Service. And I have no doubt that the management that's going on in the forest lands that you manage is very good, but you need the funding to be able to do it. And so many of the things that you brought up are things we're hearing throughout the day. So thank you all for your time with us today. We always learn so much. I yield back.
Thank you all for being here today. We appreciate it very much. Interesting testimony, and we'll take it into consideration. We try to put this bill together, and it will be inadequate, I'm certain of that, but we'll certainly look at your priorities of what we can do.
Put one foot in front of the other.
That's right.
All we can do.
That's all you can do. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Panel number 11, Victoria. Greg Hitchcock, Jeremy Picala, and Ron Allen. I got that one.
I'm easy.
Yeah, you're easy.
Ready? Okay. Wonderful. Good afternoon. My name is Victoria Kitchian. I have the honor of serving as the chairwoman for the Winnebago Tribe. Thank you for allowing us to share our priorities. First, I encourage the committee to increase funding for BIA public safety and justice programs. The BIA and law enforcement staffing shortages and overall insufficient level of police services is a long-standing issue in Winnebago. In just the last year, we've had multiple instances where BIA Police Department in Winnebago was severely short-staffed. Last September, in fact, our chief of police was detailed to another area for 120 days without notice to the tribal council or rationale from District 1. There was no communication, and an existing officer was appointed as the acting chief of police, and that situation was on the heels of the tribe having to ask the acting chief of police to deputize our wildlife and parks officers to supplement the severely understaffed law enforcement. The BIA law enforcement has become heavily reliant on these tribal resources and tribal officers to be patrolling when others are detailed elsewhere. These are paid entirely from tribal resources. The tribal council is doing all we can to keep our community safe, but it's really hard to not think these criminals aren't feeling emboldened and our reservation is left vulnerable. However, the federal government, we urge them to, in this committee, to increase funding for criminal investigations and police services. The lack of adult and juvenile detention services is also an issue. The closest detention center is on the Omaha Reservation, 11 miles away, Thurston County, 20 miles away, but BIA law enforcement often has no contract with these facilities or there's no availability. As a result, BIA uses the Yankton Sioux Agency, which is 2 hours away, and you can imagine taking that one police officer off the patrol to transport. Turning to juvenile services, BIA law enforcement recently informed the tribe that we had to have several juvenile detainees at our Youth Crisis Intervention Center, and that center wasn't meant to house or detain or provide housing for juveniles who require extended periods of detention. We are forced to resort to things like this because there are no facilities close. The closest one is 450 miles away in Standing Rock, which is a 7-hour drive where law enforcement would take a youth. The tribe needs BIA to do a better job of having these active contracts in place, and it just puts our community at risk. So we urge the subcommittee to increase funding for detention and correction programs. Next, the tribe urges the subcommittee to increase funding for mental health programs within the Indian Health Service. Tribal members in Indian country are struggling with serious mental health issues, often facing additional and unnecessary burdens to receive life-saving treatment outside the reservation. The tribe's hospital is not capable and equipped to handle these necessary treatments for those experiencing mental health crisis. So treatment is sought outside of the facility where these emergencies can be handled. The tribe recently worked on legislation in the state of Nebraska that provides for the recognition of tribal mental health commitment orders and for the transportation and commitment of persons civilly committed under tribal law. Now that the state acknowledges these orders, our federal partners can no longer skirt their responsibility and bear the financial costs for health care of the tribal individuals. In fact, the 8th Circuit of Appeals clearly laid this out in White v. Califano. As a result of that case, the Great Plains area administers an involuntary civil commitment program to pay hospital charges for American Indians who require involuntary psychiatric hospitalization. Although the Califano case applies to the entire 8th Circuit, the Winnebago tribe and other tribes within Nebraska have had no access to this fund appropriated by Congress. The tribe urges the subcommittee to increase funding for mental health and clarify that all tribes in the 8th Circuit are eligible for the Califano fund. Next, the tribe urges the subcommittee to increase funding for tribal colleges and universities. We're very proud of Little Priest Tribal College and their capacity. They've doubled their student enrollment, they've doubled their programs, and they have a master plan to expand the campus. Our buildings are 20 to 70 years old, ranging from our library, our museum, student services, and it's just an old campus. You know, it was a former boarding school, to be honest. In addition, funding is needed to address our overcrowded classrooms and just generally a limited lack of space. There's an adjacent 10 acres that we'd like to develop and really help grow our campus and provide opportunity for our students. Allowing for that growth, we urge the subcommittee to increase funding for tribal colleges and universities and tribal college facilities and improvement repair. The Winnebago tribe appreciates the opportunity to share these points.
Knox. Thank you, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, for the opportunity to address this subcommittee today, and for this distinguished panel's attention to the unique appropriations needs of Indian country. Society Squatch Greg Hitchcock. My name is Greg Hitchcock, and I serve as the Vice Chairman of the Cowlitz Indian Tribe. My testimony today will address federal funding that is crucial for the Cowlitz Indian Tribe's efforts to support tribal government and infrastructure, preserve our culture and natural resources, and promote economic development. This includes funding to, 1, improve desperately needed public safety and physical law enforcement infrastructure, expand healthcare access and services, co-steward federal lands and resources, and facilitate tribal economic development through innovative green energy projects. The Cowlitz Public Safety Department is overburdened and acutely under-resourced. In addition to the department's duties to its tribal members and lands, it extends law enforcement services into multiple neighboring non-native jurisdictions, including one local community that lacks its own police officers. Despite its expansive and essential functions, the Cowlitz Public Safety Department operates from the confines of 2 modular buildings that house 15 tribal officers and the tribal court. Space limitations don't allow for detention processing area, holding cells, or evidence and record storage, and limit the matters that the tribal court, legal department, and child welfare department can handle. Federal funding is needed to defray the cost of constructing a public safety facility that can address the needs of nearly 5,000 tribal members, visitors, and neighboring communities. According to a 2021 BIA analysis, the total estimated public safety and justice needs for Indian country topped $3.5 billion, but the agency spent less than $500 million that same year. The enormous delta between available funding and Indian country's unmet needs is reflected in the lived experience of tribes as they respond to the opioid epidemic and other complex public safety challenges. Without a substantial increase in the funding for tribal law enforcement, the Cowlitz Public Safety Department will be unable to fulfill its highest obligation to protect the tribe, its members, and its sovereignty. Like many other federally recognized tribes, the Cowlitz membership is geographically dispersed, but the tribe is deeply committed to meeting the health care needs of its enrolled members, no matter their proximity to our health care clinics. The tribe successfully clarified with the Indian Health Service that it may use third-party revenues to provide access to health care for enrolled members who reside outside the tribe's defined service area, and we are deeply appreciative of IHS's flexibility and commitment to tribal self-determination. Cowlitz clinics serve thousands of patients annually, both native and non-native. Funding for IHS makes this life-saving work possible. This includes continued funding for the special diabetes programs for Indians, which is critical to further reduce the prevalence of diabetes in Indian country. We strongly support its long-term or permanent reauthorization. The Cowlitz Indian Tribe strongly supports the U.S. government's engagement of tribes in the stewardship of federal lands. Co-stewardship agreements leverage tribes' unique historical and cultural knowledge to better inform the use, management, and conservation of the United States' most precious physical resources. Cowlitz recently submitted a co-stewardship request to the Fort Vancouver National Historic Site, located within the tribe's historical territory, which was long used as a place of inter-tribal commerce before European contact. The tribe looks forward to working with the National Park Service, as well as other tribes that traveled and traded in the area, to provide the public with a better understanding of indigenous populations and their historical and cultural contributions. Tribes can access some funds appropriated for the federal management and operation of national parks and other federal lands, but Congress should strengthen these partnerships by making additional funds available specifically to support tribal co-stewardship agreements of federal lands. While the benefits to tribes and federal land managers are apparent, the general public benefits most through better management and conservation of federal lands. Finally, I ask that you prioritize funding for the Department of Interior programs that facilitate tribal energy development. Through innovative and sustainable energy production methods, tribes can harness their sovereignty, lands, resources, and members to promote truly impactful green energy projects that will boost tribal economic activity while lessening our dependence on gaming, while materially benefiting our environment. Knox, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, for permitting me to address you today. I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and distinguished members
My name is Jeremy Takala. I'm one of the 14 elected members of the Yakama Nation Tribal Council. I serve as the chair for the Law and Order, the Fish and Wildlife, and our legislative committee. I'm also the vice chair for the Columbia River and Tribal Fish Commission. The Yakama Nation acts pursuant to its inherent sovereign status in 1855 treaty reserved authority to protect its natural and cultural resources for the health, safety, and welfare of more than 11,000 enrolled members. It is an urgent time on the Yakama Reservation for the subcommittee to honor federal duties and obligations under treaty, statute, and trust responsibilities. Federal treaty promises of public safety within the Yakama Reservation not being met. The department relies on 1/3 of the officers needed to protect and serve the communities across the 1.4 million acre reservation. I also want to note the Yakama Nation also has trust land outside its reservation, so their expansion is very large when it comes to serving our tribal communities. Federal funding for our 638 contracted law enforcement responsibilities has been flat over the past 2 decades. The resources have been going in the wrong direction to provide an adequate federal response to the drug-related violence and the missing and murdered Indigenous people crisis of human trafficking. An unaddressed element of the public safety discussion is untreated substance abuse. The misuse of opioids have led to increased rates of addiction, mental health issues, and social instability within the reservation communities. In response, our staff are working with all available entities, including the local and state levels, to push for greater federal engagement through Indian Health Services to create an inpatient treatment center on our reservation. Under another 638 contract, we have been working for years to support the Appraisal and Valuation Services Office to catch up on the backlog of appraisals of trusts and allotted lands. There are currently around 500 individual probates pending in the tribal court, and those probates will likely require between 1,500 to 2,000 appraisals. Current funding levels only provide for a single appraiser for the Yakama Nation needs. We created a solution with the AVSO to batch mass appraisals for efficiency, but funding for training and staffing under this new approach is necessary for our members to be able to use their land for new economic purposes. The Yakama Nation's treaty reserve right to fish is more than a right to put our nets in empty water, but a healthy and abundant harvest is critical to protecting and perpetuating our way of life. Historically, the federal hydroelectric systems devastated the 17+ million salmon adults that would return annually. My ancestors negotiated to preserve our rights to that robust fishery in the Treaty of 1855. Today, the hydro system kills between 5 to 11 million salmon per year, and the 14 of the 16 salmon species in the Columbia River fishery are threatened or endangered by extinction. We cannot fish for the few abundant stocks of fish due to harvest limitations that protect the endangered stocks. For decades, the recovery funding has failed to keep pace with the required mitigation for salmon loss each year to the hydroelectric systems. This subsidy to the regional economy paid on the backs of subsistence fishing families and the sacrifices of having enough fish in our homes. Fund the hydro system's backlog of fish mitigation measures for habitat hatcheries and cold running water flows in the Columbia River, because our treaty fishers have never seen harvests benefit of true mitigation, and for more than a generation the annual salmon runs have been far below the number of salmon that get killed by the hydro system. The Yakama Nation has a 650,000 acre forest that has been mismanaged by the BIA for more than a decade. Congressional inaction here threatens the loss of more than 200 jobs on our reservation. The BIA completes less than a handful of timber sales in any given year, and a dozen of vacant forestry positions remain unfilled. Meanwhile, the Yakama member-owned logging companies have gone out of business, and the Yakama Nation's own commercial mill can no longer sustain itself from the lack of reservation timber harvest. We have requested funding for alternative harvest equipment to preserve its own timber resources from being wasted through forest decay and wildfire. This specialized equipment will assist in harvesting steep slope logs and expand the area where Yakama Nation can implement its own forest management practices despite the extreme dysfunction at the BIA for years of gridlock in the forestry program. Moving on to our water resources, the Wapato irrigation project has been underfunded to this point of system failure. The BIA has systematically decreased its support for water measurement and crop reporting.
Water conservation on the Yakima Reservation is nearly impossible without significant capital investments. Our modernization and conservation plan needs funding for the next phase of work with BIA and other partners. This Congress needs to prioritize capital investments for education. Our tribal school is nearly 70 years old. We're asked that the BIA facility condition index be evaluated, because it will take us nearly at least up to 2050 until our school meets #1 on the list. So the BIA school replacement funding needs a significant increase to address the more than 80 tribal schools ranked in poor condition. So I just want to thank Chair Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, as distinguished members of this committee here, and thank you for allowing me to make my testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I appreciate the opportunity to present some testimony on behalf of the Jamestown and S'Klallam tribe. We're a small tribe in western Washington, west of Seattle, about 60 miles. You can put our reservation in the Yakima parking lot. But we're still, we do a lot to help make a difference for Indian country and for our tribe specifically. I do want to just apologize. I've been doing this for 40 years, back to the Sid Yates days, and know better to put my phone on silent. So I hope you'll think kindly about our ask here. I do want to do a quick shout out before I get into the Jamestown ask. I am a commissioner on the U.S.-Canada Pacific Salmon Commission, so there is a budget in rights protection in BIA that funds the tribes, 24 tribes, including the Yakima Nation and the Metlakatla tribe up in Alaska. And so it's about $7 million in that budget to help us be able to be effective in that forum. So there's lots of needs in there in the different departments, but the Department of Interior, BIA, is important to all of us. I've been very active over the years with NCAI and NIHB, and I know that they always make good, strong recommendations to this committee that complement all of my colleagues throughout today and tomorrow. And we're fully supportive of them. They're very thorough in terms of the analysis and the needs with the Department of Interior. And so I just want you to be very clear that we are all very supportive of the ask that complement our ask. Without a doubt, there's a lot of issues. I also chair the Department of Interior, TBIC, the Tribal Interior Budget Advisory Committee, working with the Secretary with regard to the recommendations to the President's budget. And it's challenging. I can tell you that when we look at the budget, we know it's a challenge in terms of finding ways to fully and adequately fund IHS and the BIA programs and all the complex programs that are there. It's a huge issue for all of us. And so contract support costs and 105L is a big issue. We all support trying to move it into mandatory and advanced funding. We got it for IHS. We definitely need it for BIA for the same fundamental reasons. So we continue to urge and encourage you to seriously consider those asks as we move this agenda forward. My tribe is a small tribe, and we try to do everything we can to be effective for our people as well. One of the things that's in our ask is consistent with the President's co-management, co-stewardship agenda. We want to take over this year. In fact, we are going to, as of late this summer, a refuge from the Fish and Wildlife. And so inside of our ask is that we've had to negotiate with the Fish and Wildlife with regard to what do they use to manage this refuge. This refuge happens to be right in front of our village, right, literally in front of us, and it has many of our burial sites on it. And so it's important to us, not just for the conservation reasons that refuges are established, but also for cultural and traditional reasons that are important to the tribe. We have all become very good managers. Stewardship is a big deal to all tribes, and it certainly is a big deal to us in the Northwest. Wearing my salmon necklace here, we fully support removing 4 dams up the Snake River, as long as I can get some of the fish before Yakima gets it. Anyhow, We have to do what we can. And of course, the U.S.-Canada is harvest management, and meanwhile, we have to do with the other 3 H's with regard to protecting salmon and restoring it to sustainable levels. So that's a big deal. So in our national refuge that we want to take over, well, we are going to take over, Fish and Wildlife budget is not the same as BIA. It's very complicated, and you have to break it down in terms of how they cover the various costs. And it was not a good negotiation for us for moving it into our self-governance. We believe that the appropriate number is around $1 million, and actually to manage just 2 of these refuges. Right? There's 6 of them, and we're taking over 2 of them. It's the most popular ones. That's where all the people go to and visit, and so it's a huge deal for us. So we hope that you would look favorably at that particular ask. I want to do another shout out, Tawahi. You probably have heard numerous advocations for the Tawahi program and the $36 million that they've been asking for. It's a success. It takes many, many programs, brings them together to help our people become more safer, healthier, and more vibrant for the youth and for the families themselves. And so that's a program that is critically important. So I will leave it at that. There's lots of asks. You're going to hear about it today and tomorrow, and we know it's a huge challenge, but we do appreciate the fact that these budgets are helping us become building our nations so that we can become self-reliant. So it's a huge deal for us. So thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to testify.
You bet. Thank you. Y'all don't want me to start talking about salmon. We could be here for several days. Anyway, thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it very much.
I apologize for missing some of your testimony, but thank you for those of you who did. And I do appreciate that you brought up salmon. We have had some dam removal and a lot of mitigation on the rivers in Maine, dealing with Atlantic salmon, some of the same concerns. So, and I appreciate the chair's interest in this topic. So thank you for that. And thank you for so many of the other things that you brought up. I appreciate having you here today. Yield back.
Mr. Gilmer. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks to each of you for being here. Chairman Allen, you mentioned the co-management arrangement with Fish and Wildlife for the co-management of the 2 refuges and the importance of contract support costs. This is something I'm just hoping you can pull that thread a little bit more for this subcommittee in terms of the importance of expanding indefinite appropriations for other accounts for which that's not currently allowed under the Department of Interior. What would that mean to your tribe? What does that mean just in terms of dollar and cents and the provision of resources?
Well, thanks, Congressman. Everybody knows what contract support covers. It covers the programs that's inside the federal government in terms of how the federal government manages its affairs. And it's been a quite success. And this committee and the full committee has been fully supportive of it, covering the full cost, and we deeply appreciate it. As tribes now are becoming more assertive with all agencies within the Department of Interior and HHS, what we need is the way that your language is in the appropriation. It doesn't cover CSC. Their budgets, Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Reclamations, and Bureau of Land Management, et cetera, they don't have a line item in there for contract support costs. So as we take over those programs, there's no money there. So when the president says, okay, how do you, the departments and agencies, remove these impediments and barriers? That's one of the impediments and the barriers. So if we can modify that language just for the Department of Interior, and personally I think it should be for HHS because we're venturing into the other agencies in HHS as well, so that you only need one line item for contract support. You don't need multiple line items. And so we would urge that you modify the language because it is essential to be successful at managing any federal program.
Amen. I think you make a great case. Chairman, we'd sure love to work with you on that. I yield back.
Thank you. I look forward to working on that also. Thank you all for being here today for your testimony, and we'll talk some more about salmon, I'm sure, over the next little while. If nothing else,
we want to get you in a good mood right away.
If nothing else, we've started a debate that needed to happen.
Yes,
you
did.
Might save you some, Ron.
Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
Mr. Brian Harris and Gloria O'Neill. Brian, you'd be first.
Yes, sir. Thanks, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee.
Green light come on?
It is on.
Okay.
All right, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. My name is Brian Harris, and I am the chief of the Catawba Indian Nation. The Catawba Indian Nation is the only federally recognized tribe in the state of South Carolina. And on behalf of the Catawba Indian Nation and my people, it is an honor for me to be here to testify for you today. So with that being said, I am here today to shed light on a deeply troubling chapter in our nation's history, one that demands acknowledgement, accountability, and above all, justice. The tragic saga of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School represents a dark stain on the fabric of our collective past. A reminder of the profound injustices inflicted upon indigenous people in the name of assimilation and cultural erasure. The request I'm making today would impact the National Park Service and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. This issue holds a significant personal meaning for both the Catawba Indian Nation in South Carolina and the family of Wade Ayers. Wade, a 13-year-old little fellow from the Catawba Indian Nation, enrolled at the Carlisle in 1903. Tragically, just 4.5 months later, he passed away due to complications arising from a vaccine administered during his time at the school. Wade's remains are among those that appear to have been improperly designated, consequence of apparent mismanagement of the cemetery over the years. Between 1880 and 1910, nearly 200 Native American children lost their lives while attending the Carlisle facility. Founded in 1879 at the Army's Carlisle Barracks, this institution operated under the Chilean motto of "Kill the Indian, save the man." I'll repeat that. Kill the Indian, save the man. Seeking to forcibly assimilate over 7,800 Native American children from more than 140 tribal nations throughout a coercive blend of Western-style education and harsh labor. The toll of this cruel experiment was measured in lives lost and dreams shattered. At least 194 indigenous children were laid to rest in the school cemetery. Their final resting place is marked by simple graves, with 14 bearing the heartbreaking inscription of unknown. The story of Wade Ayers and 193 other children who remain lost in history illustrates the level of disrespect that federal institutions have historically shown to Native peoples and Native values. Here are several programs this committee should support that represent important opportunities to support efforts to protect our culture and our heritage. Number one, I urge at least $40 million for the National Park Service Tribal Historic Preservation Program. Pursuant to the National Historic Preservation Act, tribal nations establish their own tribal historic preservation offices to protect tribal lands and sacred sites. These offices receive funding from the National Park Service, but that funding has been flatlined for years, even as the number of tribal historic preservation offices has grown. THPOs are the front line of our efforts to preserve tribal sacred and cultural sites, as well as our representatives in many intergovernment discussions that impact tribal cultural heritage, including repatriation, as in the case of Wade Ayers, as well as working with museums and research centers. Number two, I urge at least $1.5 million for Native American Grants Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA, enforcement. This committee's support for dedicated NAGPRA enforcement funding in recent years has directly contributed to more effective law enforcement to protect this important tribal cultural patrimony. Number three, I urge at least $1 million for funding implementation of the Safeguard Tribal Objects of Patrimony, which is also known as the STOP Act. This law passed in the last Congress will assure the protection of many sensitive tribal items from illegal export. It is important to put in place the necessary resources in the federal government to enable this law to be implemented effectively and quickly. I further ask that you work with your colleagues to direct the Army Corps of Engineers, this is very important, to allow tribes, in addition to families, to petition for the return of remains. Historically, only living relatives of those buried in the cemetery have been allowed to pursue the returns of the remains. Relatives may not be aware of the remains that are there, that there is a possibility to request those remains through repatriation, or have the technical expertise to pursue such options. As the Army persists in its endeavors to identify and repatriate the remaining children in Pennsylvania, it is imperative that tribal nations are treated with respect, dignity, and sovereignty they rightly deserve. Throughout this undertaking, it is essential to ensure that the Department of the Interior is actively involved, especially concerning the implementation of NAGPRA. The funding I have just outlined will contribute to achieving this objective. And lastly, I would like to address one additional matter. The Catawba Indian Nation has recently submitted a request for congressional direct spending through the Office of Senator Graham in the amount of $750,000. This funding is intended to support a clean water project aimed at facilitating the construction of a new school on our reservation and much needed housing on our reservation. We believe that this project will also have positive implications for our municipal neighbor, the city of Rock Hill in South Carolina. Therefore, I respectfully urge the member of this subcommittee to consider accepting this request from the Senate should it be presented to you during your fiscal year 2025 appropriation process. And I thank you for this testimony that I gave you today.
Thank you, Chief. Gloria?
Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Gloria O'Neill, and I serve as President and CEO of Cook Inlet Tribal Council, or CITC, which serves 12,000 Alaska Native and American Indians annually. As the primary tribal social services workforce development and education provider in Anchorage, Alaska, we have seen firsthand how to transform lives and create real population-level change. My testimony addresses 3 areas: expansion of Public Law 102477 to Waihe, and recommendations of the Alice Spotted Bear and Walter Soboleff Commission on Native Children. First, 477. For over 30 years, 477 has been a critical tool for tribal innovation in workforce development to serve our people most effectively by combining our employment, training, and related grant programs into a single comprehensive, tribally customized workforce development plan with a single budget and report, allowing us to maximize participant progress towards self-sufficiency, work seamlessly across programs to address the needs of each unique individual and family, and increase efficiency, decreasing administrative burden, and ensuring community impact, all while maintaining program guidelines and increasing self-determination. This is why it is so important to Indian country and meeting the federal trust responsibility. CITC has operated a 477 plan since 1994. A key component is the improved coordination offered by our one-stop shop, addressing the entirety of the individual and family to create a holistic approach that results in individuals moving from cash assistance to work and finding real career pathways. For example, in 2023, CITC participants realized an average hourly wage gain of more than $12 per hour. That's real poverty reduction. However, despite the program's effectiveness, challenges remain. We offer these urgent requests. First, the Department of Interior's Division of Workforce Development is doing a great job in supporting 477 tribes and tribal organizations, but they're stretched too thin and need additional resources to handle the growing number of tribal providers. Second, the current simple annual report format is set to expire soon. The current form does not require reporting by individual funding source. It works well and reinforces the 477 legislation. CITC supports the Federal Tribal Work Group's collaboration in producing an updated, simplified form that furthers our focus on serving people. Third, roadblocks and delays in fund transfers from other agencies to DOI are impeding the full implementation of 477, including reluctance by DOJ and delays from Commerce and BIE. Finally, we strongly encourage this committee to insist that other agencies uphold the spirit of the 477 law, especially with regard to new OMB requirements that restrict flexibility in how we manage investment funds. Secondly, I want to highlight the recommendations of the Federal Commission on Native Children, which I had the honor of chairing. In addition to highlighting the success of 477, the Commission identified critical appropriation priorities for improving the lives of Native children and youth, among them funding for training of state child welfare agencies on the ICWA Act delivered by Native experts, reforms in BIA juvenile justice allowing and expanding funds to be used for preventative measures like counselors, and funding specific programs to be delivered in public, tribal, and BIE schools about trauma, suicide, and substance abuse. Finally, funding short-term demonstration projects to support Native health entities' capacity for third-party billing. Lastly, I encourage expanded funding for the Tawahi initiative within BIA, which provides tribes and tribal organizations the flexibility to combine Bureau funds related to child welfare, including social services, ICWA, housing, anti-recidivism, law enforcement, and courts into a consolidated multi-year plan. Like 477, Tawahi has shown great success in outcomes. With a current budget of $44 million, BIA has asked for an additional $36 million in FY24 and 25 that would fund all the current incubator tribes. Through strong support of 477, investments in Native children, and expanded funding for Tawahi, we can provide greater impact in tribal communities across our country. And I just want to thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. And, you know, repatriation of both Native Americans and the artifacts that are in museums all over the world, frankly, should be a high priority. And I think we tried to make that in the last bill. We tried to emphasize that, and we'll continue to do so. In fact, I have the staff here call whenever I read an article, some museum somewhere, I have them call them, tell them they need to give those back. So, but it's very interesting. Anyway, thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up the real crime of the boarding schools and the importance of placing more emphasis on that and you know, making sure everyone's aware of that history, and also the suggestions that you had at the National Park Service. Each one of those funding lines would be very important, I think.
Yes,
really
ma'am,
appreciate it.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you. All your suggestions were great. I had a chance to go to Alaska last year during the Arctic Encounter in April and tour around the Cook Inlet a little bit with Senator Murkowski. So it was, you live in a beautiful place. I mean, it's not Maine, but it was really quite beautiful. Maine's kind of Alaska light, you know, like we just got little tiny mountains. You guys are spectacular, but also really, you know, very significant issues, and each one of your suggestions was very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad that Maine and Alaska are nice, but you flew right over to God's country. That'd be Idaho.
Yeah, where is that?
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. Last panel of the morning, or the afternoon of the day. Jill Sherman-Warren, Catalina Villamontos. If I say it fast enough, you know. Russell Atterbury and Carmine McDermott. Is that close? Is any of that close?
Yes.
You know who I meant, didn't you?
Yeah, we're here.
Jill, you're up first.
Wow, I have the hard act of following Ron Allen. I want to, say Satya Nuksan. I'm very thankful for being here and being able to testify before you today. Nobody warned me that my heart was going to break as I listened to the testimony of my fellow tribes, because I'm just here to say on behalf of HOOPA that we would like to increase the request that we submitted last year, which was $10.4 million, to $20.8 million. And this is just the bare minimum. And that's the sad thing that I heard today as people were talking, you know, my fellow tribes were talking, is that they're asking for $1 million when in fact the programs probably need significantly higher levels of funding. And we're talking about law enforcement. As you know, I come from California. Hoopa is located in Northern California. We are the largest land-based tribe in California. We have, luckily, we have been able to fund the return of 10,000 acres to the reservation. That will allow us to access a sacred mountain, and we are going to be celebrating that on May 14th. So you are invited to come and attend that celebration. And Hoopa has a long history of trying to correct the wrongs of us being, our ancestral lands being taken away, and for us to work to return them. And we talk about fish and salmon. I think I'm one of the few fortunate youngsters, if I could call myself a youngster, that had the BIA surround our house with AK-14s and arrest my grandfather and my 8-year-old brother for fishing, for engaging in traditional fishing. And those are really raw memories for me, because I remember the fear that I had when they came, because we were just trying to assert our fishing rights. And now we have fishing rights and we don't have any fish. Last year, we were able to harvest 364 salmon to feed 3,600 people. You're talking about needing to have Jesus come along and perform a miracle to ensure that we have that. We need funding for law enforcement. In northeastern Humboldt County, it is Hoopa that provides a majority of the law enforcement within the northeastern county. We are also the ones who provide the emergency services, ambulances. Many of the local towns wouldn't have access to ambulance if it wasn't for the work that we've done. The Tawahi Initiative, everything they've said, and all I can say is I refer you back to the U.S. Civil Commission's report that they did in 2003 called A Quiet Crisis, and then their updated report that was in 2018 called Broken Promises. All you have to do is look at those things and know that we need to be funded at a much higher level. We talked about law enforcement and healthcare, you know, several years ago, there was a study done by a private Indian Health Committee, and they found that if we could just get the same amount of funding that prisons do for healthcare, we would be on an equal basis. So can we just get the same amount of funding as prisons, U.S. prisons? Like, that's the level of where we're at in terms of healthcare services. Have there been increases? Absolutely. Have those increases been monumental to us? Absolutely. But the need is very well documented. And I hope that at some point we can fund that. I'm also besides being on my tribal council, I'm also the executive director of the Native American Environmental Protection Coalition, which is a coalition of 28 tribes. I work with EPA, predominantly with EPA. I also serve on the California Air Resources Board Environmental Justice Committee. I also sit on the Cal EPA Tribal Advisory Committee. So environmental issues are near and dear to my heart, and I see the struggle that tribes have. If there was something that I would love to see is that the General Assistance Funds under the GAP program, or the GAP program, I would like to see action taken to fund that program for tribes into perpetuity, because GAP acts as aid to tribal government in terms of environmental protection, and we have to do those things ourselves. In terms of wildland fire, as you know, with climate change, maybe I'm not supposed to say that here, but we are experiencing wildfires almost all year long. October was our last wildfire, and yet the tribe is almost broke by that, because we are still waiting for over $3 million worth of reimbursements for assisting in those fires, and it is a huge strain on our government funding. So I'm kind of veering off of my actual prepared speech, but I felt like this might be my one opportunity to bend your ear and say there's all these things that need to be done. I also kind of want to touch on, because we talked about IHS, I want to talk about the Rehabilitation Services Administration Section 121 programs, which is the program that funds tribal vocational rehabilitation programs, which is much like a state program. We need to make sure that tribes are getting those money. They're under that particular program, we're allowed to get up to 1% of the total amount funded, and we have never met that barrier. And we need to be making sure that tribes that have these programs, HUPA, we have a program along with UROC, we need to make sure that those programs are funded sufficiently, because the need is great. We are losing so many young ones, whether it's to be murdered and missing or have mental health issues, and we're all struggling with those things. So you've heard from a majority of my colleagues here about the need that exists within Indian country, and I don't know how we're going to get those things really impressed upon not just you here at the table, but your colleagues as well, because I know that most of the times our school systems do a disservice with teaching Native American history, and there's a lack of understanding that we are not an ethnicity. I mean, we are an ethnicity, but here before you, as enrolled tribal members of our tribes, we are citizens of our governments. And so we're asking you guys to uphold the treaties and the promises that have been made and broken.
Thank you, Jill. Catalina.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. Oh, yep, sorry. Can you guys hear me now? Good afternoon, Chairman Simpson and Ranking Member Pingree. I'm Catalina Villamontes, Pechanga Band of Indians member, Riverside San Bernardino County Indian Health Director and Board Treasurer, and I sit on the California Rural Indian Health Board as a director. My tribe is one of 9 in the consortium of Riverside San Bernardino County Indian Health, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Year after year, you hear from tribal entities requesting more Indian health funding. While these needs are important, so is the need to protect the recurring funding for Indian health programs that we already rely on to provide services. Unfortunately, delays in the federal budgeting process exemplify why the entire Indian health service budget needs to be moved to mandatory appropriations. We are extremely appreciative that in fiscal year 2023, Congress first provided for advance appropriations for the IHS. However, certain accounts were excluded from those advanced appropriations, including contract support costs, lease funds, and certain facility funds. The threat and disruption of potential shutdowns, sequestrations, and continuing resolutions continue to loom over our operations despite advance appropriations. And the only way to ensure that Indian health programs are held harmless like other federal health programs is to move the IHS budget to the mandatory side. This is necessary to uphold the federal obligation for Indian health care to provide funding stability for tribal health programs. Inflation, especially in the medical sector, has decreased our buying power and means the funds we have do not go as far as they historically have. Post-pandemic provider salaries, medication costs, and nearly every component of our programs have increased. While in fiscal year 23, the administration's program to fully fund the IHS required $36.7 billion. Only 1 year later, that number rose to $54 billion. Yet the total agency appropriation remains less than $10 billion. Oh, did I say million? I meant billion on those other ones. We continue to support the budget's push towards full funding for the IHS. The California IHS area does not receive equitable funding. Our state is one of 4 IHS areas that are designated PRC dependent, meaning we have little or no access to an IHS or tribally operated hospital, and therefore must purchase all or a large portion of inpatient and specialty care from non-tribal providers at a significantly higher cost. Every year, our PRC funding is nearly or completely depleted before the end of the fiscal year. As a result, our patients often must forego access to certain specialty care that they need unless they have non-IHS resources to cover the cost. On behalf of the 68 federally recognized tribes and the tribal organizations that I represent, we respectfully request this committee support Congressman Kevin Kiley's PRC budget request of $82.9 million for the California IHS area in fiscal year 2025. This request was endorsed in writing by several members of Congress. We also asked the committee to support funding for the development of 2 regional specialty care centers in California. When these facilities are operational, we could refer our patients to them to receive the care that is available. It would also alleviate some pressures on our PRC budget. Given that there are 12 IHS areas across the country and the California area is one of For formerly designated as PRC dependent, California is often overlooked and chronically under-resourced by IHS. As a result, we have little recourse to correct these inequities without congressional support, and we need you now more than ever. Please support my PRC requests. We know that the IHS has continued to ask for large budget outlays for its health information modernization project that the agency intends to move to replace its antiquated system with a new Oracle system. Unfortunately, our programs could no longer wait for IHS to decide to modernize. So over 6 years ago, we purchased our own modern electronic healthcare record system that was necessary for us to meet our patient needs. However, using this different EHR technology impacts our ability to submit data to the federal data warehouse, and the incompatibility between our system and IHS's system impacts patient data that may feed into funding formulas. We ask that Congress provide funding to improve systems integration with new IHS EHR technology and ongoing maintenance costs required to enhance data accuracy. Lastly, but not least, contract support costs, which cover our necessary overhead and administrative costs, are critical to sustain our operations and ensure that our program funds can be dedicated to services. However, ever since Congress mandated full funding of contract support costs in 2014, IHS has devised different ways to attempt to limit or reduce these reimbursements. Therefore, we ask the committee to direct IHS to eliminate its reconciliation process, which permits IHS to come back years after our books are closed to request funds back for a prior fiscal year, many of which have already been spent. Our indirect cost rate setting process already accounts for over or under recoveries in any given fiscal year, and this repetitive agency reconciliation process only distorts this process further. I thank you for your time and consideration of our requests.
Thank you, Kathleen. Russell.
Ayuki, hello. Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Buster Atterbury. No, I don't know if I'd turn around if you called me Russell. So, and I am currently serving my 13th year as chairman of the Karuk tribe. We're located in Northern California, just below the Oregon border. A quick overview, including feed of trust process. Karuk tribe is one of California's largest tribes by population, but our trust lands are relatively small, rural, and subject to natural disasters, both in the decline of the Klamath River salmon, on which our tribe has depended since time immemorial, and wildfires and flooding that have destroyed homes of hundreds of our members. We have worked to overcome these obstacles, but we have much more to do. Karuk's involvement in removing obsolete dams on the Klamath is a major step toward restoring the river's fishery, but it will be many years before we see a return to its former abundance. To reduce the threat of wildfires and resulting flooding that have so devastated our community, we have invested in an aggressive program of wildfire prevention through traditional burning and other forestry activities, all which rely upon a well-resourced tribal government. Feed the trust process. As Karuk Tribe's trustee, Interior should be our ally in these efforts. Instead, Interior sometimes spends its limited resources creating obstacles, in this case using a unique legal interpretation to advance a gaming application that harms tribes in California and Oregon, exceeds the authority delegated by Congress, and which the department previously found fails to meet its criteria. If approved, this project would damage our tribal government's ability to manage our lands and assist our members for decades. By approving a project in Medford, Oregon, 170 miles from the applicant's existing lands, and in an area in which the department found that the applicant lacks a historical connection, the department would set a new national precedent without consulting tribes, conducting a regulatory process, or congressional authorization. The sponsors of the relevant law have written Interior to express that it violates their legislative intent. Despite all of this, Interior is using an expedited process which fails to include consultation with tribes actually located in the area. A bipartisan group of members representing our region have requested appropriations language prohibiting Interior from approving projects like this one. A more rigorous process which includes tribal consultation and considers the views of state and local governments would remain available to the applicant tribe. Interior has a trust responsibility to all tribes and should never interpret the law to benefit one at the expense of others. That is why this application is opposed by 26 members of the House and Senate and over 65 tribal governments. These decisions must be made fairly and transparently, for when land is taken into trust for one tribe in an area to which others have a connection, those tribes can be harmed forever. Deed of trust decisions for cultural and core government functions should be expedited, but those intended for purely economic purposes such as gaming require thorough review. I respectfully request that the committee exercise its oversight role, include this language in your 2025 bill, and restrict Interior from advancing projects which do not comply with the law. Forest and management wildfire. Tribes have always used fire for cultural and land management purposes, and I urge the committee clarify with report language that tribes develop fire programs on trust lands without the need for BIA approval. We need to be able to act quickly when we identify a hazardous situation, not when we are finally given permission to do so. The committee should also recognize the importance of BIA, fish, wildlife, and parks funding the tribes receive. While it is not a great deal of funding per tribe, this is one of the most flexible tools we have for resource management on our land and natural forest lands. This side note, we encourage co-management. We have worked diligently with the Forest Service. They are on board. We will continue to ask for equitable funding for the tribes so we can work together and create what we know is a sustainable economy on our forest lands. Real quick for end, I asked and consider baseline law enforcement funding to tribes in PL 280 states for education on PL 280 law. Thank you for your consideration and your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Comment?
Does it reach?
Greetings, Chairman Simpson and Committee Ranking Member Pingree. My name is Charmaine McDarmont, and it is an honor to appear before you today. I serve as chairwoman of the Tule River Indian Tribe of the Tule River Indian Reservation in California. I formerly served as the tribe's general counsel for over 20 years. We are Yokuts Indians, and we have occupied the entire San Joaquin Valley in California for thousands of years. On behalf of our 1,999 tribal members, I come before you today to share with you our most critically underfunded needs in order to guide the United States on how it can best fulfill its treaty and trust obligations to the Tule River Tribe and properly fund Indian programs and services that we rely upon most. Our funding priorities are our water settlement, funding for wildfire prevention and fighting, and also law enforcement. Tule River, like other tribal nations, are no strangers to land loss, fraud, broken promises, unratified treaties, and theft of our homelands and our water. Our ancestors signed the Treaty of Paint Creek in 1851, shortly after California became a state, but Congress never ratified that treaty. Instead, we were driven from our homelands, relocated to 2 reservations, only to be forced a third time to our current reservation, into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. We work hard to make our inadequate reservation a viable, safe, and nurturing homeland. The Tule River Indian Reservation is located in central California, south of the town of Porterville. It ranges in elevation from 900 feet to 7,500. The reservation's eastern boundary abuts the Forest Service's Giant Sequoia National Monument. In 1922, the United States violated their trust duties to us when they appropriated our water rights to downstream users, leaving us in a battle for over 100 years to regain those rights back. As the former general counsel and as the current chairwoman, I know that without water and adequate infrastructure, our members and the tribe as a whole suffer. We're actually forced to limit the number of enrolled tribal members
because our Constitution includes a residency requirement to enroll with the tribe. To become enrolled, you have to have a tribal member parent, and they have to live on the reservation for a year before you are born. The only other way is to reside on the reservation for 5 consecutive years. And right now, we have a moratorium on the establishment of any more land assignments for homes because we don't have enough water to serve those homes. So as you can see, it's hard to get people enrolled. And imagine being forced to limit the number of citizens of your nation due to lack of water and infrastructure. Imagine the impact that has on our tribal elders and our youth. The lack of water hinders our ability to sustain our food lifeways, maintain economic development, and schools for our children. You may recall hearing about the wildfires ravaging the great sequoias and killing those ancient beings. Those same fires burned and encroached on our reservation, threatening our lands. We have giant sequoias also on our reservation, and they burned several of those. Without water, we had no choice but to pitch in to fight those fires with little to no resources and rely on federal assistance to bring in water to control the fires. This is why we adamantly advocated and continue to support the Save Our Sequoias Act, to fast-track support for future wildfires because they are coming. The Save Our Sequoias Act can never replace real long-term infrastructural solutions. That is why I'm here to make sure you understand why mandatory and immediate funding for Indian water rights settlements must happen. We are thankful to Senator Padilla and the late Senator Feinstein for their support of championing our water bill, S-306, the Tule River Tribe Reserved Water Rights Settlement Act of 2023. The proposed settlement will settle and declare our rights to thousands of acres of feet of water, return the land containing the headwaters of the South Fork of the Tule River, which is about 9,000 acres of the Sequoia National Park and Monument. That will go back to the tribe, and it would also fund a reservoir and water delivery system that will safeguard the Tule River tribe with managed water for generations to come. While we await introduction of the House version of our water rights settlement legislation, we believe moving this legislation forward into law will achieve success towards meeting the United States trust responsibility to the Tule River tribe by safeguarding our rights to access clean drinking water. However, there is no justice without funding this settlement. I'm running out of time, so I defer to my submitted written testimony that outlines our other most critical funding needs, and I thank you on behalf of Tule River Tribe for hearing or for listening to my testimony, and I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for your testimony today. Seems like we got it done just about in time, since we're going to have votes here in about 2 minutes. Ms. Pingree?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you all for your testimony. It's been interesting for us to be able to hear from tribes all over the country, and in California, you have a lot of interesting things in common, particularly the increased amount of wildfires and the challenges that you deal with water. And getting those water settlements is obviously very critical. And you are right in what you mentioned. It's kind of hard to picture having a community and having to say, you can't join our community because there isn't enough water when you have enough land or, other resources that would make it possible. So I understand why that's so critically important. Thank you for your comments about the Indian Health Service, and certainly I hope that someday we're in a position to provide mandatory funding. I know advance appropriations was really important, but I know the difference between, well, actually I can say, being on this committee, I've learned the difference between advanced and mandatory in the long run is far more critical. But I appreciate all that, and you're right when you were talking in the beginning about, so often people are just here saying, we could live with the bare minimum, but what we really need is, we need 25 law enforcement officers. Could you just get us 2 more? And I hope sometime we're not in the position to just be looking at the bare minimum. So thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. Yield back.
Thank you. Yeah, it is great to have you here, and it is, as Ms. Pingree well knows, that in the East, they try to get rid of water. In the West, we try to save every drop. That's why you have in the East Coast riparian water rights, and in the West we have prior appropriation water rights. Whole different set of laws, and anybody that understands them is nuts. Because there's nothing worse than a water attorney. Because I don't know how they understand all that stuff. It's very complicated. But anyway, thank you all for being here today. We look forward to working with you as we put these bills together. Thank you. I guess I should say that the committee stands adjourned. Till tomorrow.